I think this bodes well for the group discussion that will follow, which will be following later. Okay, should I do I could just do a waving thing. That was extremely effective. So I'm extremely excited to introduce our final speaker of this conference. And I want to give one more thank you to, if we can do a round of applause for all of the many, many people who have put in so much effort to make this happen. Our final speaker is Professor Ginny Reardon, who is Professor of Sociology and the founding director of the Science and Justice Research Center at the University of California, Santa Cruz. Her research draws into focus questions about identity, justice, and democracy that are often silently embedded in scientific ideas and practices, particularly in modern genomic research. Her training spans molecular biology, the history of biology, science studies, feminist and critical race studies, the sociology of science, technology, and medicine. She's the author of Race to the Finish, Identity and Governance in an Age of Genomics, which came out with Princeton University Press in 2005, and the more recent, The Post-Genomic Condition, Ethics, Justice, and Knowledge After the Genome, which came out with Chicago University Press in fall 2017. Let's give a warm round of applause to Professor Reardon.
Okay, well, thank you very much to both Joel and Eric for the invitation and for the opportunity to step back and reflect. It's not often that we have this opportunity with such a broad range of thinkers in the room. So I appreciate that, as well as the Brooklyn Law School hosting this. It's been a real pleasure to be here. Now, I know I'm the last speaker of this event, two-day event, and there's a big city out there and lots of exciting things to do, so I'm going to try to make this interesting. So we'll see. So my remarks, and I'm actually responding to the question. This title was actually written by the conference organizers. I'm responding to their provocation. They've asked me to comment on how should we understand the relationship between genomics, justice, and democracy. And I will be relying in my talk today on the findings from this decade-long ethnography of efforts to democratize genomics that I just got done finishing writing. This effort to transform genomics from a techie data field project of elite scientists to the everyday knowledge of people. So from 2004 to 2014, in the immediate aftermath of the sequencing of the human genome, I conducted fieldwork in the United States, Scotland, Mexico, and England, interviewing genome scientists, social scientists, policymakers, genetic counselors, bioethicists, social activists, and lawyers about the condition of living with the genome. Not what it's going to be like tomorrow, but it's what it's like today, and how we could possibly transform it into a meaningful, in something meaningful and beneficial for all. In my interviews, I learned about the specific challenges they faced, the unexpected lessons learned, and the uncharted territories that lay ahead. All that I talked to, I should note, I think legitimately believed in this promise that was made and elegantly articulated by President Clinton, among others, after the completion of the draft of the human genome. This is the announcement in the White House in 2001, that the genome would be a uniting force, what we were just hearing about from Caroline, about a source of solidarity. So, but however, how to uphold that promise was on the ground, remained far from clear. And my comments today are informed by what I learned by the lessons all of these people taught me. So to my comments. Over the last few decades, we have witnessed a radical change in the meaning and effects of the central principles and values of Euro-American liberal democracies. Consider the deeply held value of information. Genomics emerged as a dominant way of knowing life during the same period that Google, Facebook, Amazon became major players in the conduct of capitalism, transforming information into a raw resource that could lead to great wealth. In this new milieu, it was no longer possible, if it ever was, to imagine that the institutions and practices that create information sit outside of power, helping citizens to make democratic decisions. Instead, they are conduits and centers of economic control. Thus, it should not surprise that post-genomic calls for more open flows of information and more robust informed consent procedures failed to provide the grounds of public trust and ethical action. As the cultural critic Jody Dean astutely observed, no one today should accept a model of political life that should work just as well as a model from Microsoft or AT&T, or Facebook or Google, to update Dean's formulation. In this new milieu, how might one understand the relationship between genomics, justice, and democracy? That is my question. What principles and practices can ground just governance when the central pillars of liberal democracies, access to information and participation, generate the labor and raw materials of 21st century bioinformatic capitalism? To reform informed consent, as has been done so many, many times, will not be enough. We can give subjects the right to consent to use the right to consent to the secondary uses of their DNA, and it might alleviate some immediate feelings of injustice created by forms such as this one that I'm always asked to sign when I go to my medical doctor that tells me I have no rights over any of my data or tissues, and that they can be shared with anyone that any of my doctors come in contact with. And if I don't sign it, I don't get medical care. This should actually be illegal. Anyway, we could reform this, and it would give people, I think, the sense that they're being respected more, but it also might inadvertently do additional harm. Giving citizens the power to give broad consent to secondary uses effectively removes possibility of citizens controlling the use of their DNA and data for some purposes rather than others. And we do have extensive ethnographic data at this point to demonstrate that this is exactly what many people would like. It's not to condone all genomic research, but maybe some of it. Indigenous and Native peoples have time and again insisted on it and have created legal frameworks to implement it. It's not impossible to do, which it's often said. And I refer you here to Kim Dahlberg's last chapter in her book, Native American DNA, for a nice overview of some of those efforts. People from across the globe also regularly ask for access to a much broader range of information than any genomics initiative has ever contemplated providing in its informed consent process. So people I talked to from Tuskegee, Alabama, to folks who were part of the HAP map in Ibadan, Nigeria, to Glasgow, Scotland, people wanted to know who will benefit in the broadest sense, not just who will receive medical treatments, but who will receive the jobs, the profits, the research, and the recognition. Whose regimes of governance shall prevail? If we're going to create a genomics that has a chance at advancing any meaningful notion of justice and democracy, then it is critical that we address these questions and make visible how money flows, buildings are built, resources are allocated, recognition is gained, research priorities are set, and energy is consumed as Fortune 500 companies and universities invest in information about our bodies and genomes as the route to health and justice in the 21st century. How many of the Earth's dwindling resources do we use as we asked what the value of breast cancer SNP data is for breast health? And this is a UCSF Athena study that I've been asked to enroll in. In the year 2000, to sequence just one human genome, Craig Venter needed Solera's local power company, Pepco, to put in a new transformer and power pole. In 2010, at my own university, processing genomic data reportedly used up all the campus's spare energy capacity, and I heard the facilities people complain about this. So the monetary cost of genome sequencing may come down, but as big data rivals air travel as the #1 consumer of carbon on the planet, its environmental costs only go up. Despite dreams of endless progress and openness, we live in a world of these environmental, economic, and social constraints. Difficult decisions confront health providers and governments as they attempt to decide how to properly allocate public and private resources in context where too many fail to access basic services. These decisions matter greatly. They determine the ends and purposes of today's growing biomedical informatic infrastructures. They shape the constitution and meaning of things that powerfully gather and direct lives in these opening decades of the 21st century. Personal information, global health, biomedicine, you've probably heard of these things. As such, they deserve these larger, more fundamental questions deserve our collective attention. Yet only rarely do these world-defining decisions become the subject of discussions in the decade after the sequencing of the human genome and the extensive efforts that ensued to inform and include people in decisions about the future of genomics. Those initiatives that did make the greatest effort, the International HapMap Project, Generation Scotland, did so in the opening years of this new millennium before the emergence of Facebook, 23andMe, and social media platforms that are more convergent, but decidedly less democratic. Today, the extensive efforts of the HapMap and Generation Scotland to listen and to respond to those from whom they sought DNA have been largely forgotten or recast as naive and even counterproductive. Bioethicists, policymakers, and social scientists no longer talk about community engagements as the leading edge of ethical engagements with research subjects. Indeed, these efforts are now often viewed as short-sighted and naive. But if not community engagements, then what does democracy, what does justice look like in the domain of genomics? While there is no clear answer, I argue that any modicum of a socially, politically, and environmentally robust post-genomics will require developing the collective capacities to respond to this question. This, in turn, will require long-term investments in institutions that support the arts of collective judgment. I refer here not to legal judgments about whether a law has been broken, or whether scientists' judgments, or about scientists' judgments about the results of an experiment. Rather, I am concerned about judgments about what laws should govern us and what research questions should interest us. That is, what should lie between us, which is what this term refers to, interest, as a matter of our care and concern. Should it be a genome? Who is the we who decides in a world where nation states are fragmenting, corporations are consolidating, and actions proceed in transnational intercultural contexts requiring, as the negative legal scholar Rebecca Sosi has argued, intercultural justice. Judgments about these core constitutional issues lie at the heart, I would argue, of our best notions of justice. They call us to attend to the first principles that guide any society and its pursuit of knowledge. John Rawls captured this aspect of justice in the opening pages of his enormously influential A Theory of Justice. Justice is the first virtue of social institutions, as truth is of systems of thought. No matter how efficient or well-ordered, Rawls argued, if the laws and practices that form institutions are unjust, they must be redone. We live in times where questions of justice are pressing, not just for groups historically excluded from society. Today, an increasing number feel excluded, unseen, and uncared for by dominant institutions. Genomics is a part of and not apart from this deepening crisis of governance, which is playing out as these seconds tick away on my clock. A central actor in informatic capitalism, the field of genomics has for decades evacuated flesh and blood from the human condition, leaving bits and bytes. In my choice of words here, I intentionally invoke Hannah Arendt. In this, her 1958 celebrated work, Arendt responds to Heidegger's phenomenology, asking after the experience of being human. Writing in the wake of World War II, Arendt had cause to ask if there was anything left of phenomenology, of experience. Indeed, was there anything at all? Why is there anything rather than nothing? Heidegger famously asked. He reminded us that thing derives from the Old English word ding, which means a meeting or assembly. It's our term for our first parliaments. A thing or a gathering arises around a matter of collective concern. Yet in the wake of World War II and a shattered Europe, what collective remained out of which concerns could arise? Arendt provided a hopeful answer. She was not a nihilist. She believed humans could love the world again, which was going to be the title of The Human Condition for the Love of the World, through acting. Hers was a minimalist philosophical anthropology that found meaning in human practice. Institutions of government and science spent the last 75 years providing their own response to this threat of nihilism. As Evelyn Fox Keller astutely observed, they sought the secrets of life, not death, referring to the physicists who went into biology after World War II. But as Foucault would help us to see, fostering life can provide the conditions for a more insidious form of power. Power, in an age of biopower, he argued, operates and flows through our capillaries. Power, in an age of bioinformatics, I argue, transforms the blood in these capillaries to data, enabling its easy incorporation into the conduits and networks of informatic capitalism. In an age where fish in the sea deplete, trees on the land burn, and oil on the earth dries up, this data has become the one thing that is not decreasing. It's increasing, along with human beings who are a source of this data. And that data has become a new resource from which states and corporations attempt to create things of value. Margaret Atwood and Kazuo Ishiguro help us to understand what happens when the bits of humans become harvestable. These are not the dark words of a former jaded biologist who used to sequence DNA, turned whatever it is I am now. Biologists responsible for the creation of human genomics also understood the potential dehumanizing nature and actually dehumanizing nature of their work. I just heard the prison door close behind me. Thus begins the common thread. The autobiography of John Sulston, the great head of the British effort to sequence the human genome, and who fought valiantly to keep the human genome in the open space and not patented. In his description of these words were his description of the moment he realizes that he has signed on to the Human Genome Project and there is no going back. Having just met with Jim Watson at Cold Spring Harbor, he is standing on the train platform at Syosset on the Long Island Railroad under a, quote, harsh and bright sun, the sound of a prison door reverberating in his ear. Given the book's emphasis on the importance of openness and its triumph over the nefarious forces of private enclosure, this was a surprising choice for an opening line, and it's actually why I ended up reading the rest of the book. Yet the theme of the prison door clanging shut threads throughout the book, alerting the reader that this will be no simple tale. Sulston chronicles throughout the transformation of his everyday work life as it moves from the small, intimate spaces of intense human interaction at the Laboratory of Molecular Biology in Cambridge to the vast cavernous spaces of the sequencing machines at the Sanger Center, built in Hinkston, miles away from molecular biologist's much beloved pub, the Eagle. We learn of a life no longer marked by the late-night encounters in the lab, coffee time, drunken punting expeditions, and Guy Fawkes celebrations, but one lived under the pressure of keeping an army of sequencing machines producing data on schedule. The needs of the machines and not those of human beings take center stage. These needs bring Sulston reluctantly, but seemingly inexorably into a capitalist world of production. Throughout his account, of the nearly 15 years he devoted to sequencing the human genome, the amounts of money required always threatened to run the machines, always threatened to overreach the capacities of public governments and private foundations, making the project perennially vulnerable to a venture capital takeover. Belief that the genome was the secret of life cast a powerful spell. Compelling action and the building of beautiful new buildings, the Sanger Hinkston building, These buildings located sharing of data between machines at the heart of the endeavor, displacing the sharing of ideas among human beings. Worries about whether genomic investments in the infrastructures of data and machines might inadvertently displace and devalue thought and life remained an ongoing and defining concern of the post-genomic era. Should a mode of doing research so dependent on speed, technological innovation, and venture capital dominate the life sciences? Should a field that promised future medicine, not immediate improvements in healthcare, move to the heart of biomedicine? Genomics, Harold Varmus, then head of the National Cancer Institute, and was pictured in one of Alondra's slides earlier, argued in 2010 is a way to do science, not medicine. Then and today, the best of intentioned genomic initiatives confront challenges as their ability to open up these fundamental questions of knowledge and of science and of justice to collective judgments, move beyond the narrow mandates of research grants and funding streams. This is despite the great efforts made by genetic counselors, social scientists, policymakers, and others who committed themselves in the decade after the sequencing of the human genome to responding to them. Dialogue groups led by genetic counselors and bioethicists in Tuskegee, Alabama, came up with several policy recommendations, including the clear statement: basic health care should come before genetic services. But the project did not have the support it needed to interface with policymakers and act on these recommendations. Social scientists, lawyers, and scientists working on Generation Scotland devoted considerable energy to community consultations, but once the collection of samples started and issues on the ground actually started to arise, they had no more money for the social scientists. And they had no capacity to keep doing what they wanted to do, which was to continue the public engaged responses. Instead of carrying forward the important work of each of these initiatives to cultivate collective judgments, Genomics, riding the wave of the social media revolution in the late aughts, defaulted back to openness as its dominant vision of democracy. Genomics should be open to us all of us, so the federal initiative today seeks to convince. Today, openness is the one remaining liberal value that garners broad support, at least in some contexts, clearly not when it comes to FBI reports, which are held in secret, closed, secure buildings in the basement of a Senate building. But anyway, yet it is openness, necessarily democratic or just. Consider a fundamental property of openness, no matter how free or open anything might be, decisions must be made. Decision derives from the Latin root cis, which means to cut or to kill. Not all forms of life or uses of data can be supported. Some live and prosper, others fail to gain support and die. A judgment must be made. The question is not whether to judge, but how. As Arendt reminded us, there is perhaps no question more fundamental to political life than this one. How do we make decisions? Through the sword or the word, she asked. Much depends on how we answer this question. For Arendt, the answer was clear. Either we learn to speak to each other or we die. Speech, she argued, is what makes, quote, human togetherness possible. It is through our efforts to find the words to tell our stories, harking back to our discussions yesterday, that we reveal ourselves to each other. This speech differs, she argued, from mere talk. The latter is instrumental, designed to fool a foe or dazzle with propaganda. The former is revelatory, designed to foster relationships and collective life. It requires the presence of others different from us. And it's through speech with them that the common world forms. Speech, in this sense, is a form of articulation. It joins. For Arendt, such speech also creates the grounds for judgment. It fosters thinking with others, what Arendt described, referencing Kant, as an enlarged way of thinking that is fundamental to judgment. And judging, she writes, is one, if not the most important activity in which sharing the world with others comes to pass. Thus, Arendt formulates her simple but powerful call at the beginning of the human condition. What I propose, therefore, is very simple. It is nothing more than to think what we are doing. Yet today, how we might think and speak that which we do is far from a simple matter. In times in which more and more of life is constituted and conducted via personalized media and infrastructures that create echo chambers of our own thoughts, how can we speak and think with others across differences? Human plurality, Arendt contended, is the condition of political life. How might we gather in our plurality to think what we do in the post-genomic condition? If we want to live democratically or justly, which we may not, with a genome, much more energy, attention, and resources must be devoted to answering this question. Any invocation of genomics as a public good increasingly will ring hollow in the absence of spaces in which a broad range of citizens gather to speak with one another about its fundamental ends and purposes. Yet recent trends do not bode well for creating this kind of robust speech that makes political life and scientific knowledge possible. In recent years, public relations has eclipsed public engagement. Consider the city in which I live, San Francisco. Now, in many ways, San Francisco is ground zero for precision medicine. Former president of product development and at Genentech, and also the former chancellor of UCSF, Susan Desmond-Hellmann, co-chaired this report that you may know about, the National Academy report that launched precision medicine. She then oversaw the adoption of precision medicine as a mission of UCSF. This entailed hiring a design firm, Ideos, which helped the university to come up with its Me for You campaign. The goal of the campaign, which won a design award, was not dialogue or even solicitation of DNA samples and medical information, but rather meaning management. Visit the Me for You website then and today, and it's really unclear what this website, I remember first encountering this, man, what is this? But the goal here is to interpolate its visitors into a vision of genomics and precision medicine as an unquestioned good that will save children's lives. As UCSF spokesperson David Arrington explained upon winning the design award, we're trying to put a new thought into the public consciousness of, medically speaking, what can they do for someone else. So consider their website. And I actually want to play for you just briefly this video. It centers this girl, Georgia, who has a slight risk of triple-negative breast cancer.
This is Georgia. She's not a Caucasian female aged 5 to 9. She's not the sum of a stack of pages in a clipboard or a PDF. She's not just the only child born at precisely the strike of midnight on July 5th, because she's not a number. She's Georgia, the daughter of Theodore and Sylvia. She likes to finger paint, and her best friend Sarah, and having tea parties with her dog, Senior Crumbles. Someday, 20 years from now, 25, maybe 30, she has a slight chance of developing triple-negative breast cancer, which is a nasty name for a nasty disease. It's only a slight chance, and it's 20 years away, but for us, that's too much. To us, that's too soon. That's why we do what we do, for Georgia. Join us. Go to meforyou.org to dedicate action now to bring the future of care forward. UCSF, we're all in this together.
Okay, so this is 2015. So the question is, what is it that you would do if you went to that website? And clearly, UCS hopes that you'll act in response to this video. But what would the good biocitizen do? Now, if you look at the website today, apparently you would start vaping. So if you read this, right now you can help raise awareness for this movement. Think of the one person who means the most to you, the one person for whom you would do whatever it takes. Click the Dr. Dapper coupon and dedicate yourself to that person's health. Then you go down here and it says, later they're going to ask you to consider deepening your dedication to that one person. For the many, we're all in this together. We also encourage vapors to share their experience with switching to vaporizers. All right, so this raises in a rather farcical manner. This is up, still up. Maybe it'll come down now. But this raises, I've never put this up before. So anyway, this raises in a farcical manner a question that these PR efforts keep at bay. Here's the Dr. Dapper discount. Anyway, is so-called precision medicine good medicine? So consider the much celebrated new immunotherapies. While many argue that the promise to cure cancer, that these new immunotherapies promise to cure cancer, the results are much more modest and complex. Consider the experience of Kate Bowler, a stage 4 colon cancer patient, a recipient of immunotherapy, and author of Everything Happens for a Reason and Other Lies I Have Loved, a title that I love. Bowler explains that living with the new immunotherapies meaning living in 2-month intervals. Today, immunotherapies are extending life in that period of time, 2 months, for some, like Kate Bowler. For others, like my uncle, they are extending life for 2 months before rapidly ending it. These medicines can produce spectacular short-lived recoveries when they work and dramatic deaths when they don't. The reason is because they operate by unleashing the immune system. And that works well as long as they are attacking the cancer cells. But if they hit something off target and have off-target effects, then they could attack a vital organ, and this is what leads to the dramatic deaths we've seen. These are short-lived extensions of life followed by dramatic and quick deaths, and all at an extraordinary cost. Immunotherapies and all medicines arising from genomics are the most expensive drugs we have ever seen. The reasons are simple, but also multiple. One is that they are often orphan drugs. So during the 1990s, biotech pioneered the orphan drug approach to drug development and proved that it could be highly lucrative. One no longer needed a blockbuster drug to make money, even lots of money. This is what Alexion proved when it created Soliris, a drug used to treat atypical hemolytic uremic syndrome, a condition that affects 200,000 people. At a cost of $9,500 a year, in 2010, Soliris was the most expensive drug on the market, and its stock value went above Apple. Today, it is outdone by the new gene therapies with price tags over $1 million. Indeed, Spark Pharmaceuticals just released LuxAeterna to treat retinal degeneration at a cost of $850,000 per eye. That's $1,700,000 per person. And this is a gene therapy that will keep people from going blind. So the question is this good medicine? Curing the blind has particular salience and meaning in a Christian Euro-America. It is apropos that Christian Gardena was one of the first to receive the treatment. He also went on, you may know him from America's Got Talent, and he was losing sight, and his sight was restored by this drug. It extends eyesight for about 10 years is where it's at from my reading that I've done on this. Really fascinating reading the cost-benefit analyses when you actually get into these reports of how they talk about lives and what they're worth. But is it appropriate? So it is appropriate that we have this drug and it's come out, but is it appropriate to imbue doctors with such Christ-like powers? In practice, good doctors in this scenario must not just heal, they must appeal to the wealthy. The world of biomedical research is actually filled with amazing good people. They do not want to create drugs that their patients cannot afford. So you now see researchers who are both doing their research and courting the wealth they need for health. So you now have to do donor work and be a biomedical researcher. Precision medicine, and I'll come to a close here, precision medicine has been described as the moonshot of medicine, as we were just hearing from Alondra. The metaphor is apt. It is a medicine animated by a larger-than-life imaginary in which the blind can see again and women and children are saved. It generates hope and inspiration. And this, I argue, is actually an important thing to inspire, to offer hope for a better future, especially in these times of historic inequality, where a healthy, worthwhile life seems out of reach of many. Imagine a world in which we had nothing that was offering people hope. But the question becomes, what are the things around which we want to be generating hope? The problem is that when precision medicine is not a moonshot, precision medicine is a morass. When it is not inspiring, it is entangling people in opaque, complicated, and inhumane data worlds. For the vast majority of people today, the now of genomic medicine is not receiving novel treatments, it's receiving novel tests. For these individuals, today's genomic medicine is filled with many questions and uncertainty. Even for diseases like breast cancer, in which genetic variants are clearly linked to pathology, there are still thousands of variants of unknown significance. Most may not be pathological, but nonetheless create problems, anxiety, uncertainty, the unnecessary removal of breasts. In this case, you get these VUSs, and if they go inappropriately interpreted, it could lead to a misdiagnosis, and it could lead to mastectomies, as it did in this case. Many, even the majority of patients, must navigate this testing without the help of genetic counselors because we don't have enough genetic counselors. As reported recently in JAMA, of 773 women considered to be at high risk for breast cancer, 81% reported wanting to see a counselor and only 40% reported speaking to one. And this UCSF Wisdom study that I've been asked to enroll in many times, a study that seeks to enroll 100,000 women in the Bay Area, no participant receives genetic counseling in advance of genomic testing. These are the realities about which we, whatever we's we can muster, and there need to be many, must speak. We must speak. We need the speech of political life, not the dazzling talk of propaganda that too often pervades precision medicine. And we do need, as UCSF argues, to redefine possible. But goodness cannot and should not be defined by clicking on a website, especially not the one I was just showing you. Today, the institutions, Capital and Salesforce, that are creating one data platform, both for the patient and for the consumer, it's Salesforce that's doing the Athena project, doing all the infrastructure for it, are defining what it means to be good, to save mothers and children. This is an overly narrow vision of possible that forecloses too many urgent concerns. This is plainly evident if you leave UCSF Benioff's hospital here, it's advertised here, and go down the street on which it is located, 3rd Street, just 10, 12 blocks, where one encounters extreme poverty, lack of access to basic health care, gun violence, nuclear contamination. This is a Superfund site. Environmental pollution, where in the city of San Francisco, people typically have historically come and dumped their oil, where the trash dump is. Surely these are also important matters for the future of our children. The problem of meaning that lies at the heart of the post-genomic condition and the effort to define what it means to be a good biocitizen arises from this overly narrow biotechnocratic understanding of life, health, hope, and democracy that eclipses the broader needs of people and the planet. Time and again, when asked about genomics in the decade after the sequencing of the human genome, people from across walks of life and worlds attempted to articulate genomics to these broader concerns of their everyday, daily lives. Those in Ibadan, Nigeria, spoke of the need for support for a community health center. Those in Houston, Texas, envisioned an endowed chair at a local university so that their ways of knowing and living in the world would be passed on to future generations of those of the Gujarati diaspora. Those in Scotland pressed for sharing the benefits of the research with their fellow citizens. And while NHGRI did arrange for support for the Community Health Center in Ibadan, Nigeria, they resolved to never do that again. On the argument, this is not what we are designed to do, and institutionally designed to do. We are not designed to provide basic health care. We've heard this time and again. Where is the space? Where are the institutions for the basic things that need to get done? They argued it was not their remit to address deeper structural issues, and they're right about that. Yet, does this have to be the answer? Surely a different response is possible, one that attends to the needs of people and not machines, the needs of today, not a futuristic tomorrow. Any possibility of averting the dark future that things of precision medicine portend, like this Me For You website. Any possibility of building a good democratic future with genomes requires that we steer away from the allure of the spectacular and address instead the fundamental problems of knowledge and justice that lie before us. Thank you.
Bravo, Jenny. Bravo, and
Thank
thank you. This is not a question, but just a comment. Right now, I'm sure I speak for many of us, as a container of so many competing feelings and facts that seem irreconcilable. To cap off yesterday's wonderful program here, last evening I went to the 92nd Street Y to hear a talk that was entitled Immortality. And the two primary speakers were Siddhartha Mukherjee, author of The Gene, Pulitzer Prize-winning author of The Gene, and Elizabeth Kolbert, Pulitzer Prize-winning. She's a spectacular environmental reporter of The New Yorker who won a Pulitzer Prize for the sixth extinction. So we had Siddhartha on the one hand talking about the building of genomics towards a life of infinity, and Elizabeth, on the other hand, talking about engineering a planet of destined for extinction by humans.
Wow, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Infinity or extinction? Everything or nothing. That seems to be the world in which we're living, and the genome embodies that as a thing. I mean, one of the things I've been really interested in is why do we have a genome? You know, what kind of a thing is it? And it is, I think, a kind of thing that is both everything and nothing, which I think is where we're at. And what we need is this vast middle ground where people live. Because people aren't everything or nothing. There's some things and not other things. And so we need things that are some things and not other things, not nothings and everything, or nothings and everythings. There you go. How about that?
Thank you for that presentation. So to follow up on that, I was thinking about the quote from Professor Nelson, Obama's talk about the Precision Medicine Initiative, and thinking about that as a very artful occupation of that middle ground, saying, well, you know, I think this is valuable, but I don't want someone else to own my genes.
Yeah.
And contrasting that with the commercial you played, which was a really crude narrative. It played to extremes, to this, one voice giving a sense of threat, and yet appealing to cuteness and driven in really stark ways. So I'm thinking that, just as a writer, most of the people I've met here are in philosophy and the social sciences, but I think we need more writers to debunk the really crappy stories and just point out that, that technology is being driven by really bad stories, you know, and that we need better ones to guide us.
Yeah, no, I very much agree with that. I mean, one of the things that I say in this book is we do need better stories. And I offer the book as a series of stories that I hope are, you know, both engaging. They're not, you know, like you don't read it and you're drawn into theoretical language, but it's a story with actors, with people, with outcomes, and told with a sense of storytelling, which I think we do need. These very simple stories, like the one about Georgia, these are not good stories. So I agree with you. This is something we were talking about yesterday, that you know, we may not be able to produce those policies, but we can tell better stories, and that is an important part of moving people. So, yeah.
Thank you so much for that. That was wonderful. You know, one of the difficulties of organizing this conference was that an animating concern of Eric's and I's was that the very way a framework or the very way a question is posed can so easily over-determine any of the possible answers that one might give. And as we hoped, we've gotten a lot of pushback on the very framework of the conference as a whole and from so many different angles. But there's one question in particular and one pushback in particular I'd love to hear you speak more about, and that was the way we were pushed to think about, from Professor Kolopina this morning, to push to think about the way the very concept of justice and the very concept of democracy, those concepts may themselves be fundamentally imperialist and colonialist and other things in ways that we are not only not attentive to, but maybe we need to give those up and be far more critical about those. So I'd love to hear you speak a bit more about that, since you opened that up a little bit with a little side comment in the talk. So
Yeah. Well, no, I think this is one of the more interesting questions we've come upon. Those of you who've known me for a while will know that, when I started this piece, actually, when I started this work, I was not interested in writing a book. I was interested, having started my career in genomics, and quite committed to making a better genomics. I had decided after writing a book about a project that wasn't very inspiring, the Human Genome Diversity Project, which had widely been viewed as a failure, that what I wanted to do was spend time trying to work with projects that were trying to do something I thought was better and making a better science, a better world. And so at that time, the way that was being talked about was democratizing. And at that time, this is the frame that I used. It was a frame that was being used in the field of science studies. Sandra Harding had put out a book about this. Some of the science studies scholars were writing about this, and I had been trained in political theory, although I had been trained in post-structural theory. So my approach to democracy was slightly different than most people's approach to democracy. But nonetheless, I was happy to embrace the frame, as I think others of us in the room were. And unfortunately, what happens is when you do these things, the initial enthusiasm, often when you hit the ground, it becomes more complicated, and democracy becomes a slogan, and it doesn't, follow through with what you were hoping for. And so, in recent years, I have, instead of democracy being the horizon, I've embraced justice, and people who know me will know that I direct a Science and Justice Research Center, and at Santa Cruz, I think the reason why we came to justice as the organizing principle were a couple of reasons. One is that historically our university had been committed to the project of social justice. It was a much better gathering object than ethics. If we wanted to work with our scientists and our engineers, if you said justice was a gathering, thing that gathered us. It was what we held in common. Ethics, not so much, because for scientists and engineers, too often that was a bureaucratic process, a checking of a form. It was also about you did something wrong or you might do something wrong. Not what kind of world do you want to build? And the question I wanted to ask, and I think those around me wanted to ask, is what kind of world do we want to live in? Let's ask the aspiring question. And justice for us allowed us to ask those aspiring questions. So it's very practical, but also not just practical, but it spoke to our aspirations. And so that's how we came up with Science and Justice. Now, we thought about calling it the Reflexive Knowledge Laboratory. Now, had we called it the Reflexive Knowledge Laboratory, I do not think I would be standing up here today talking to you about the things that we do as part of Science and Justice, because it would have never flown, okay? It just wouldn't have got the broad support that we've managed to get. So these are answers on the ground. Different people on the ground in different places are going to have different answers to these questions, but what I care about is that people are able to ask the question about what world do they want to live in. And I think part of what's wrong with solidarity, going back to our last talk that Carolyn gave, or last session where Carolyn was talking about solidarity, I think part of the problem with genomics and solidarity is that the experience of genomics can be so uninspiring. It can be just about someone taking blood from you or putting your data somewhere and then all the threats. It's not the collective community building project that I think we think of when we think of like why we get up in the morning. Now we do get up in the morning to save Georgia, I guess, and that is what genomics has going for it. But what we need in this moment, I think, is not putting forward children who might die as our aspiring goal. We need to not pull at those heartstrings cheaply. We need a richer, more robust version of the world we want. Not a version of the world in which Georgia is going to maybe die. She has only a slight chance, by the way. We need a version of the world where we get up in the morning for a much more robust vision of who matters, what counts, and what world we want to live in. And that is what I'm after. Whether or not you call it justice or you call it something else, that's the project. And I think that doing the work of articulation amongst ourselves, we do need to find the words that will do that work. And words matter, speech matters. What words we use carries a lot of power. So maybe we don't want to use justice in some contexts or all contexts. But I think getting ourselves grounded in the important questions is what I think, to me, matters. I don't know, I'm not calling on anyone, I'm letting. others
I
handle-
just
yeah.
loved this idea of gathering, right, as the activity, right? And that there can be kind of multiple kind of gatherings, right? So that there
Yeah.
can be a plurality.
There must be.
And different solutions that, like almost incubators of kind of solutions that people come up with for these problems. But that the most important part is that people come together,
Yeah.
right? That there is the thinking that you were saying, Hannah Arendt, you know, asked for, that we think about these things. Yesterday you asked me kind of like, well, how would law do this? And,
Yeah.
and in some ways it is to kind of create a gathering, right? You know, to do the community organizing or, you know, what have you. And it's just a part that has to happen in order to be on the path to thinking.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think as long as, I always tell my students, like, I don't care if you learn the truth in this class, and maybe I shouldn't say that, but I care that you think, and I care that you want to think with one another. And I you know, and I hate to be so much of a Luddite when I take on social media like this, because I know it also does great things. But I think it also threatens to undo the FaceTime we still need, the one-on-one conversations with people that still need to happen. I don't think that we can design a data interface that's going to do what we need to do to create the kind of collectivity that we need in this moment. I mean, you challenge me, I'm fine. People want to argue with that. I'm open to that, but gathering is what matters, however we do it. Yeah.
I think that was our last question.
I'll be very brief.
Yeah.
What kind of world do we want? What kind of world do we want? I'd add, what kind of world do we want to live together in?
That's right. Right.
And when we talk about gathering, one of the problems with the notion of justice is it's often conceived of without thinking about those who can't come to the table.